What did your teacher do that made you call the worst teacher ever? In her defense, 1993, she was a middle school English teacher. She tried to explain to me that the sun wasn't a star. I argued back and she got mad because I wasn't the teacher. You know that feeling when you get real pissed because you know you're in the right? That was me. But I just ate it. I wished I would have followed through because I would have loved if she had to explain to her boss how the sun wasn't a star. Her explanation was that it's a sun, not a star. My sister had an English teacher who, despite claiming she had lived in the US, would still sometimes pronounce certain words wrong or use a phrase in the wrong context, and my sister would naturally try to correct her. I guess she must have felt really disrespected over the fact that a 15-year-old had the audacity to speak better English than her, because when my sister graduated at the end of the year, she gave her a B in written English despite her only having gotten that grade on one assignment. All the rest were A's. The reason she got a BBTW because she had used a common figure of speech that the teacher claimed wasn't a thing. That lady was a spiteful piece of work, and I'm glad I never had to deal with her. The worst were the teachers who would take books away from me and hold me up for ridicule because they disagreed or didn't approve of the genre or subject material. I was always into science fiction and horror genres and many of them didn't consider it true literature worthy of reading. I remember my father getting into it with one of the teachers who disapproved of Robert Heinlein's Stranger in a Strange Land, to which he pointed out it was on the required reading list of a lot of major universities. Dad was awesome like that, and chewed the teacher and principal out for having the temerity to try to stop any student who wanted to read, regardless of what the genre was. It wasn't the teacher, but the school librarian I'd bump heads against on what I was and wasn't allowed to read. She had learned I was dyslexic from my speech therapist that went to warn her that as part of my therapy I would be taking out a larger amount of reading material than usually permitted for a grade 5-6 student. However, the therapist didn't mention I would be taking out the young adult literature and not the picture books reserved for the special needs kids and younger grades. She was so stubborn on not letting me sign out the books even the grade 12s were struggling with in English. I would sit in the library during recess and an hour after school, just to read through the entire young adult section on my own. The teacher in charge of supervision during recess didn't like that I would sit inside all day, but didn't want to get into an argument with either my therapist or the librarian. The only books I ever got a poor score on when the school introduced mandatory reading quizzes to gauge what reading level you could check out, was Black Beauty and Anne of Green Gables. I hated those books. The story was boring and I couldn't be bothered at the time to memorize parts for the quizzes to at least pass the requirements for approval for more books at that level. The worst part was there wasn't any alternative books I could have read that would have interested me so I could pass the level cap. It really made me mad when the librarian tried to use that as a gotcha moment too. I had a teacher who lost my assignment work. We did not get on at all. Even before that, I slacked off for most of the year, and then, with only a couple of weeks to go, realized I'd better do the paperwork to go alongside the practicals. Although I hated that part of the course, I worked hard on it, and the work I handed in was a solid okay. He took it from me, then failed me. Said that my practical work was a B, but my design drawings were not handed in, so an F. I can't have been the only student that this happened to, because after I complained, he left the school. Yeah, even between the late 90s to the 2000s things changed a lot at that school. I was a crazy little kid, and they had something called the withdrawal room, which was essentially a small office with metal anti-theft style coverings over the windows that looked out into the rest of the room. https://sablines.com/wp-content/upload/2017/02/grimsafe-henge3.jpg like this, and super beefed up doors. They'd put you in there if you were having a meltdown and were a danger to yourself or others. I went back to visit in 2019, and I saw the room and started laughing. They're now using it for storage. My old special ed teacher saw me laughing and immediately turned to the class and explained what the room used to be, then let them know that I was the only one who ever managed to escape the room. I kicked the door down. I had growing pains in grade 1. The teacher was mad at me for seemingly crying for no reason, and assumed I was crying over having to do the assignment she gave us, which was collecting assignments we were proud of so she could show them to our parents. She knew I hated parent-teacher interview night and I had asked her to not say anything bad about me to whatever parents showed up because I'd get in trouble. What she didn't know was I was going to be beaten and or yelled at by the parent that was forced to go. Anyway, she assumed I was just being disobedient and having a temper tantrum over the easy assignment, when in reality my skin and muscles were being stretched because my bones were growing too fast, causing me intense pain, especially for a 6-year-old to handle. A boy in my class went through the same thing in grade 11 and he cried during it, when he had a pretty high tolerance for pain himself. I had an English teacher and I was convinced he gave me low grades just for the fuck of it. Everyone else thought I was just full of it. One assignment I gave it to one of the class pets to look at and I asked for improvements. They showed me their assignment and said there isn't much of a difference here. When I read it, the only difference was the odd word choice, synonyms, but the structure was the same. They got 80s and 90s and I got 60s. I had no problem sharing my score and the smarter kids starting grilling the teacher on the methods of how he evaluated. Okay, so hear me out. I made a candelabra but a candelabra finger candles with the flames replacing the nails. And it was good. I went to this chick named Reese. She drew pretty much the same thing but upside down a chandelier but a hand, and so what we did is we had her look it over and their teacher said Reese's was great but mine needed improvement, so we swiped the drawings on the day they were due and we got told the reflective grades me, 55, Reese, 97, so we talked to the teacher about it and her excuse was art. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder, so we pressured her on it and she gave up and just passed both us, but she called my parents about it and my parents called Reese's parents and they had received no such call. I had teachers like that. They had their favorites either they liked or hated. One time a student blew his gasket at a teacher because she kept giving him low grades and insulting him. He punched her in the face and he was arrested. Well, the event got a lot of people talking and the teacher was investigated. More complaints came in and she was fired. She then moved to another state because she was so well known and hated in our state. Edit, I hate autocorrect. The student punched the teacher. I went to a small school for middle school and we would switch teachers for some of the different subjects. During history class, the 6th grade teacher had us reading out loud from our textbooks and stopped the class to yell at me to stop what I was doing. I was just staring at my book like the rest of the class. She continued to yell at me to stop and I proclaimed that I wasn't doing anything. After her continued berating, I asked what am I doing, and she said I don't know, but you need to stop. Then proceeded to give me detention during recess and lunch period where I was not allowed to eat or go outside but had to sit in the hallway where she would check up on me every couple of minutes. Towards the end of the recess period she came out and said that I was, in fact, not doing anything and took her anger out on me but wanted to make an example of me and felt embarrassed in front of the other students for scolding me over doing nothing. Then she made me promise not to tell anyone. This is my first time recounting this story. Still to this day I am bewildered by her behavior. My teacher in grade 3/4 had the class make clay animals for Christmas presents for our parents as an art lesson one day. It was such a small amount of clay and she specifically said it was for both parents. Well, I happened to be the only child who had divorced parents in the class. I asked her what I should do because they don't live together and can't share the gift. She literally said, well, you'll just have to pick your favorite parent then ... Why would you say this to a young child? She did other horrid things but this was at least the first time I came home crying. My university lecturer was the most incompetent bloke I've ever met. He taught I.T. and for the life of me, I can't figure out how the fuck he got that job. In this first lesson he got us to sign up to Twitter so we could share lesson content. tweet at each other so we'd get to know one another and also tweet him. Everybody, including the lecturer, used Twitter once. We just used the university intranet to share shit. Again, during the first lesson he announced he was going on holiday for 4 weeks during our first term. All of his lessons were PowerPoint presentations. Each slide had about a paragraph of text written on them which he would read out loud while awkwardly looking over his shoulder. Once he was done doing that, he would essentially repeat what he had just said. One day he asked us for help in booking his airline tickets online because he couldn't figure out how to use the website. Edit. I should add he didn't really understand how Twitter worked, didn't know how to tag people, and thought it was a good way to send documents to one another. My 8th grade app sociology teacher took one of my tests and put it on display on a projector, my name bright and clearly visible to everyone. I'd gotten a perfect 100 on the score, so I assumed it was to tell everyone the right answers as they reviewed the test, and maybe to brag on my unpopular, uncool, dorky outcast ass for a moment. He then said, "Hey class, look at this handwriting." An expectant pause. "This handwriting is the handwriting of a future serial killer." He then unceremoniously turned off the projector and then proceeded to teach the rest of the class as though that interlude never happened. Well, I've suffered panic attacks since I was a kid. Didn't know what it was at the time. Backstory: in 4th grade I threw up at school and was in a lot of pain. But my nurse and 4th grade teacher thought I was faking, so they forced me to eat and stay at school. My mom has always enforced drinking water when feeling ill, so I did, but ended up vomiting in class, and my teacher took my water bottle from me and threw it in the trash, saying that's why I threw up. So then, come the last day before winter break in 4th grade, I ate way too much during our Christmas party and started feeling sick and anxious. I tried to take sips from the water fountain, but my 4th grade teacher held me down and swung me around, and all the kids watched it happen. I ended up biting her to let me go, and she called CPS on my mom because of this happening. All over some damn water. Absolute worst teacher ever. I had a sub in 3rd grade. I was maybe 8 years old, that expected us to be completely silent at all times. Someone asked the guy next to you if they knew the date, had to ask to use the restroom. She punished the whole class because someone said something or made a sound, and that's unacceptable. When she left the room, she would stop at the office and eavesdrop on us through the PA system and punish us when she returned if we weren't quiet while she was gone. I remember her telling us how disappointing we all were to her. To this day, when I think of her, it's usually got a "fuck you" attached to it. Can't be bothered to remember her name. When I was in high school, my grandfather died. I went to a boarding private school, so I actually left campus and went home for close to a week. I dutifully emailed all my teachers and my dean that I would be missing X amount of classes. All but one replied with sympathy and basically, "No problem, you'll get caught up when you get back." When I returned to school, everything was fine until my math class. When I stayed after to ask for the materials to catch up, my teacher started laying into me about how it was my responsibility to stay on top of things, and that I couldn't just cut class and then expect him to help me out. Well, being a 14-year-old girl who was still very raw from burying my gramps, I burst in 2 years and managed to choke out. But my grandfather died as my only defense. The teacher at least had the courtesy to look like he felt bad, and said he'd get me my stuff later, and I went back to my dorm. It's probably not all that bad compared to other people's experiences, but he's literally the only teacher to ever make me cry. He wasn't great at teaching math either, so it was kind of crappy all around. I hated that math class that year. I have posted this before, but here it is again. This is from a few years ago, but I have been thinking about this for a while and I need an outlet for my rage. I used to love being in my school's orchestra, and up until high school, the music we played was good. I had some friends in it. All was well. Then, we got a replacement teacher since the old one was retiring, and man was she cringe. On her first day, without anyone knowing, she picked the locks on everyone's instrument cases and rearranged everything in there to her liking. Next, she forced everyone to go on a mandatory field trip during our school's test week, This meant that I had to do all those tests over the weekend, which made me furious. There was some other dumb stuff she did throughout the year, but the biggest offense of all was what she did on the last day of school. This was a consent for the whole school that included the band playing with us. Not only did she cut out all the background music for our music, which sounds bad when you're playing a jazz unit, but my dumb teacher decided that chairs were overrated and gave all our chairs to the band even when they had plenty. Could we just stand and play? No. She made us sit down on the ground while playing in the concert. We looked humiliating in front of the whole school. I am so glad I dumped that class and teacher. One of the worst teachers I ever had was in 7th grade math. She was mean to mostly all of the students. I think she had some favorites. She would make us feel stupid by getting mad whenever someone didn't know something, making everyone afraid to ask anything. She gave us unfairly hard tests and then yelled at us when we did bad/failed them. Her demeanor scared a bunch of the people in the class, including me, into not ever participating, which of course she got mad at us about too. She gave an unnecessarily large amount of homework, I mean like literal pages of problems each night. She gave so much work that ever my parents said that it was way too much for a 7th grader to do. She never did anything to help anyone out or guide people in the right direction if they were confused. She never did anything to accommodate for my disabilities, which made me so mad. I got I think a 75 in her class at the end of the year, and my parents were not even mad because they understood that what she had done and put me and the other students through had taken a toll on me and my ability to complete the extreme amount of work she assigned up that year. She was just really bad all around. Fuck you, Mrs. Shuck. I went to a local community college after high school to take some general ed classes before a potential transfer to a 4-year university. The CC had a lot of issues with staff and funds due to it being in a very small rural town, and not a lot of great options were offered there unless you wanted to take a pottery class or learn woodshop. So I'm enrolled just trying to get some basic classes, and my advisor says they're offering a new class called Introduction to Jazz, which I thought would be pretty cool. I've enjoyed jazz music and wanted to learn more about the history and everything. I can honestly say the teacher that taught that course was the worst freaking person, and she did not know a single thing about jazz. Every lecture was her reading the textbook chapters word for word for an hour. I could have learned the same amount on my own outside of class rather than driving there and sitting in the room with everyone. And this woman had no musical ability. She would tell us all stories about how she played her piano for jazz shows, and she really hyped herself up. As a class, we encouraged her to bring in a keyboard and play for us, you know, as one might do in a music course. She put that off for a few months, saying that she would eventually. But one day we walked in and she actually brought a keyboard. We all sit and stay quiet, excited for her to play. She goes up to the keyboard and hits a few keys and then says, "Okay, I'm going to play the jazz scale for you now," and proceeds to play. Unfortunately, I didn't know what the jazz scale sounded like, and we didn't even hear it once in an audio recording or anything during class. And as I'm listening, the guy next to me leans over and says quietly, "That's not the jazz scale." I was like, "You're kidding." And he goes, "No, I took jazz band in high school." "That's not the jazz scale." I said, "What is it then?" And he said, "I have no idea." Still cracks me up to the day. I wonder what in the world she thought she was playing. And then she tried to pull some real crap later in the semester when she gave us homework assignments. I had a couple friends and we all would work on our homework together in between class. Her assignments were all really basic, things like which jazz player wrote _song in _year. Things like that. Questions you could easily find in the textbook and get the right answers quick. One day the teacher holds back 2 of my friends after class, and after waiting on them they tell me that she accused them of plagiarism, which I don't about you all. But isn't plagiarism a form of cheating where you submit someone else's words as your own, like in an essay or a thesis or something like that? Writing down the exact correct answers to fill in the blank questions to me does not count as plagiarism, because if they had changed their answers to avoid copying, They would have gotten the question wrong, right? So they go to the dean of the college and say this lady is completely crazy for accusing them for something so ridiculous. I'm pretty sure she got called out for it, thank goodness, but by that point we were pretty much done with the class. I really hope she stops teaching that course because she really fucked it up for us.